A woman walked into a restaurant, hoping for a peaceful meal, only to be met with humiliation and hatred solely because of the color of her skin. The cold refusal and contemptuous stares didn't just wound her spirit. They ignited within her a determination to confront such injustice head-on. She didn't anticipate that her decision to stand up that day would disrupt not only her life but also the life of the man who insulted her. This confrontation wasn't merely about personal justice. It became a beacon of hope for thousands. Will truth and justice prevail? Follow me to delve into this story, a story that will keep you captivated until the very end. Lauren Harris strode through the restaurant doors, her confident demeanor commanding attention. Behind the hostess podium stood Henry Clark, his red MAGA hat prominently displayed atop his head. The smug grin on his face grew wider as his eyes landed on Lauren, his posture shifting slightly forward, as if scrutinizing her. "Good afternoon," Lauren greeted, her voice calm but resolute. "Table for one, please." Henry straightened, a slow, mocking smile spreading across his face. "We're fully booked," he said curtly, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the reservation book without even glancing at it. Lauren raised an eyebrow, her gaze sweeping the dining area. At least 6 tables stood empty, their linens untouched, pristine. She gestured subtly toward them. "I see a few open spots. Surely you can seat me." Henry leaned over the podium, his eyes narrowing. "Those are reserved for the dinner rush." Lauren's tone remained steady. "Doesn't look like peak hours to me." Henry's grin deepened, his voice dropping into a cold, dismissive tone. "Listen, ma'am, I don't think this is the place for you. Maybe you should try somewhere a little more casual." Lauren straightened, her gaze unwavering. The air seemed to thicken as a few patrons glanced over, some quickly averting their eyes. "Excuse me," Lauren said, her voice low but firm. Henry chuckled dryly, waving her off with a dismissive hand. "I said we're full. End of story. People like you always make everything a problem." Whispers began to ripple through the room, the once calm ambience turning tense. Lauren held Henry's gaze, her dark eyes steady and determined. "I have every right to sit and eat here, and you know it," she said, her voice tinged with restrained anger. "Not today," Henry replied sharply, the smug smile under his red hat widening. "I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be served," Lauren said, her tone controlled. "Unless you're implying something beyond reservations and policy." Henry sneered, crossing his arms. "I don't owe you an explanation. My restaurant, my rules, and I've decided you're not eating here today. End of story." Lauren's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "You're refusing to serve me without a valid reason? I'd like to hear your explanation." Nearby diners shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the two. A middle-aged man murmured something to his wife, tension etched on his face. Henry smirked, his tone dripping with derision. "You want a reason? Fine. Let's just say we like to keep a certain atmosphere here. This place isn't exactly for someone like you." The room fell silent. A sharp intake of breath came from an employee near the kitchen, who busied themselves polishing an already spotless glass. Lauren's fingers tightened on her purse strap, but her voice stayed firm. "Someone like me?" she repeated, daring Henry to elaborate on his thinly veiled insult. "Don't pretend you don't know what I mean," Henry snapped, his tone thick with disdain. "You're causing a scene. Why don't you take that attitude somewhere else? There's a fried chicken joint down the street, probably more your speed." Heat flushed through Lauren's veins, but she kept her composure. She glanced at the diners, many of whom were now fully tuned into the confrontation, their gazes nervous and fleeting. "I want your name," Lauren said, pulling out her phone and raising it. "And I want you to repeat what you just said. For the record." Henry froze momentarily, his face stiffening before he sneered and pointed at her phone. "You think you can intimidate me with that? Go ahead, record me. Post it. I don't care. People are sick of your kind playing the victim all the time." Gasps of shock rippled through the room. An older woman whispered urgently to her companion, "He's gone too far this time. Lauren activated the recording feature, the camera squarely aimed at Henry. "Just to be clear," she said, her tone measured. "You're refusing to serve me because of people like me? Care to clarify?" "You heard me," Henry barked, his face reddening beneath the brim of his hat. "And if you don't get out right now, I'll have you thrown out." "Don't think I won't." Lauren smiled faintly, her eyes sharp, the phone steady in her hand. "Thrown out for wanting to eat here? Or is there more you'd like to add?" The room held its breath. A young server near the podium hesitated, their gaze flickering between Lauren and Henry, unsure whether to intervene. At that moment, Evelyn, Henry's wife, emerged from the office in the back. Her face paled as she took in the scene before her. "Get out of here," Henry roared, jabbing a finger toward the door. "I'm done wasting my time with you. You're not welcome here." "I'll leave when you explain why I'm not welcome," Lauren replied, her voice sharp but calm, cutting through the tense air like a blade. "That's it," Henry bellowed, slamming his hand on the podium. "I'm calling the cops." The words hung in the air like a threat. Lauren didn't flinch. "Good. Call them," she said, lowering her phone slightly but keeping it recording. Lauren Harris stood her ground, her expression calm but resolute. "I'll wait right here," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "to see if your refusal to serve me based on my race is legal." Henry Clark faltered for the first time, his confidence wavering. His eyes darted to the surrounding patrons, several of whom now watched him with uneasy expressions. "You want to play it this way?" Henry growled, his voice lower but no less venomous. "Fine. You'll regret this." He strode toward the wall-mounted phone, his footsteps echoing in the silent restaurant. Lauren remained still, her phone capturing every moment. The atmosphere was stifling, the hushed murmurs of the diners fading into an oppressive silence. Henry grabbed the phone, his MAGA hat casting a shadow over his tense features. He pressed the receiver to his ear, his eyes glaring at Lauren as if daring her to stop him. "You want the cops involved?" he spat, his voice trembling with fury. "Fine. Let's see how much trouble you like stirring up when they get here." Lauren didn't move, her phone steady, the camera fixed squarely on Henry. Lauren Harris stepped back slightly, her expression calm but unyielding as she faced Henry Clark, whose finger jabbed angrily toward her. His voice, filled with outrage, echoed through the tense dining room. "And remember to state clearly the reason you're calling." Henry's finger tightened around the receiver, his knuckles white. His audacity seemed to waver under Lauren's unflinching gaze. "Hello? I have a problem at Clark's Grill House," he said, his voice suddenly becoming dramatic, intentionally to make an impression. "There's a woman causing a disturbance, refusing to leave despite my repeated requests. She's aggressive and disruptive." "Aggressive and disruptive?" Lauren repeated, her voice calm yet loud enough to echo in the quiet room. She gently rotated the phone, filming the silent diners, their eyes filled with tension. Henry glared at her, his free hand clenching into a fist. "That's right," he growled. "She's still filming me, intentionally threatening. Send someone over immediately." He slammed the phone down without waiting for the other end to respond. Lauren crossed her arms over her chest, her voice low but resolute. "You just called the police because I want to dine here? You know that's harassment, don't you?" Henry let out a dry laugh, his laughter echoing against the restaurant's gleaming wooden walls. "Harassment? Ma'am, I'm the one being harassed here. You think you can walk in, disrupt my business, and then play the victim? Not a chance. You refuse to serve me because of my skin color," Lauren said, her voice sharp as a knife cutting through the air. "And now you're using the police to threaten me. This is not just harassment, it's illegal." Henry's face flushed red, but before he could respond, a diner stood up. A middle-aged woman, her blonde hair neatly styled, carrying a designer handbag over her shoulder, hesitantly spoke up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been sitting here and witnessing everything." "Mind your own business," Henry interrupted, his voice sharp like a blade, startling her. "This has nothing to do with you." The woman bit her lip, her eyes narrowing but still sat down, casting a sympathetic glance at Lauren. Henry turned back to Lauren, pointing at her. "You want to turn this into a racial issue? Fine, I don't care. Call it whatever you want. But this is my restaurant, and I have the right to refuse anyone I like." Lauren pursed her lips, her phone still recording every word he said. "Actually, no. You operate a public business establishment, which means you must comply with anti-discrimination laws." "Don't preach to me," Henry cut in. "People like you are always looking to cause trouble, always trying to make everything about yourselves." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Lauren took a step forward, phone still steady, her voice unwavering. "And people like you think you can hide racism behind so-called policies. But the law is clear. Discrimination is illegal, and you'll pay the price." Henry sneered, his voice lowering to a hiss. "Pay the price? You don't scare me. People like me built this country. You should be grateful we're even letting you through the door." A heavy sigh echoed from the back of the room, where Evelyn, Henry's wife, had just stepped out. Her face turned pale as she witnessed the scene before her. She stepped forward as if to intervene but immediately froze when Henry gave her a warning glance. "I think you've said enough," Lauren said, her voice calm but sharp. "You've just let everyone here know what kind of person you are." The sound of police sirens grew louder from afar. Henry's smile returned, arms crossed, voice full of satisfaction. "Looks like your little drama is about to backfire." Lauren didn't blink. "Just wait and see." The diners exchanged confused glances as the tension peaked. A couple near the window hurriedly settled their bill and left, not wanting to witness what was about to unfold. The restaurant door swung open, and a police officer stepped in, his gaze sweeping across the room. Lauren turned to face him, phone still recording. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, her voice even but clear. "I'd like to file an official complaint regarding discrimination and harassment." Henry's face twisted in disbelief. "You must be kidding," he stammered, but his voice weakened as the officer's gaze shifted to him, eyebrows slightly furrowing, as if silently questioning. Lauren stood her ground, her heart pounding, but her voice remained unwavering. The confrontation had only just begun, and the real battle was about to unfold. Henry Clark hurried forward, pointing directly at Lauren Harris, his voice resounding with anger. "I called the police," he declared, eyes blazing. "This woman is causing a disturbance, disrupting my business, and refusing to leave after I clearly told her we're fully booked." Lauren took a deep breath, staying calm, raising her phone slightly. "Officer," she said, her voice calm yet firm, "that's not true. I came here to eat, but he refused to serve me even though there are plenty of empty tables." She gently indicated the clearly unoccupied tables. "When I asked why, he clearly stated that decision was based on my skin color." "That's slander," Henry shouted, his voice rising in fury. He pointed aggressively toward Lauren, as if wanting to emphasize every word. "She's distorting my words. She came in here just to cause trouble, now trying to play the victim." The police officer raised his hand, his voice resolute. "All right, both of you calm down. Ma'am, do you have any evidence to support your claim?" "Yes," Lauren responded confidently, her voice steady as she raised her phone toward the officer. "I've been recording since he refused to seat me. He said I don't belong here and told me to try somewhere more casual. It's all recorded." Henry's face turned bright red. His mouth opened then closed as if searching for a rebuttal. Finally, he snapped, "This is ridiculous." He turned to the diners, his voice booming. Everyone saw her come in and start causing trouble. The room fell silent for a few seconds before an elderly man sitting in the corner spoke up, his voice shaky. "Actually," he said hesitantly, "all I saw was her walk in and request a table. She hasn't caused any trouble." Henry spun around toward the man, his eyes blazing with anger. "Mind your own business," he barked, his voice sharp and cutting. "That's enough." The police officer interjected firmly, his voice decisive, cutting through Henry's fury. He turned to the man. Sir, you're asserting that she hasn't caused any trouble? The man nodded. That's right. She's been polite the entire time I've been observing. At that moment, Evelyn, Henry's wife, stepped out from the back office, her face pale. She gently placed her hand on his arm. Henry, she said softly, her voice gentle, maybe we should stop this here. Stop, Henry yelled, brushing her hand away. Do you think I'm going to back down? She's trying to ruin my business. She just wants to eat. Evelyn responded, her voice barely audible. Lauren seized the moment. Officer, she said firmly, I also want to point out that he called the police for the wrong reasons. He accused me of causing a disturbance and being aggressive, but there is no evidence to support that. The police officer nodded, his pen swiftly moving across his notepad. Understood, ma'am. I will include that in the report. He turned to Henry. Sir, do you have anything to add? Henry smirked, his voice dripping with contempt. Yes, I do. This is my restaurant and I will run it the way I want. If I don't want to serve her, that is my right. The police officer raised an eyebrow. Actually, that's not the case. If you refuse service based on race, it violates state and federal anti-discrimination laws. Henry's face grew even redder. I am not refusing her because of her skin color, he shouted. I clearly stated that the restaurant is fully booked. End of story. The police officer gestured toward the empty tables. It doesn't look fully booked to me. A wave of murmurs spread through the room, a few diners exchanging awkward glances. A young woman sitting nearby suddenly stood up, her cheeks flushed with anger. I've been coming here for years, she said, her voice trembling but filled with indignation. Now I feel so ashamed to admit that. Sit down, Henry barked, his voice rising. No, she retorted, her voice stronger. Do you think you can treat others this way without facing consequences? Not anymore. She grabbed her handbag and walked out the door, her eyes filled with disdain as she glanced over Henry. Lauren turned to the police officer, her voice calm yet resolute. I want to file an official complaint, and I will sue. This is not just for me, but to hold people like him accountable. The police officer nodded, handing her a business card. Here is my contact information. You can follow up on the case, and I will document everything in the report. Henry stared at Lauren, his hand clenched into a fist. You will regret this, he growled. Lauren turned back to face him, her voice sharp and unwavering. No, you will regret it. She walked toward the door, and the restaurant felt a sense of relief wash over. Some diners avoided her gaze, while others nodded subtly in support. Outside, the afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the street. Lauren stood beside a patrol car, her phone still in hand as the police officer took her statement. From the restaurant window, Henry watched, his face filled with rage, while Evelyn stood behind him, silent and inscrutable. Henry Clark smirked, his eyes still locked onto Lauren Harris, as if every word he uttered was a dagger aimed directly at her. I don't care about your video, your complaint, or your so-called rights. People like you think you can bully people like me, but let me tell you, you are in my town. You don't belong here. The police officer standing nearby spoke, softly, his eyes stern. Mr. Clark, I suggest you calm down. This isn't helping your situation at all. Henry ignored him, his eyes burning with hostility as he looked at Lauren. You think you're so clever, don't you? Walking in here, acting superior, looking down on us as if we're nothing. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Lauren didn't blink, responding firmly. I know very well who I'm dealing with. A man hiding behind his privileges and ignorance because he's too petty to face the truth. Her words hit Henry like a slap in the face, his hand twitching as if to strike. The police officer immediately stepped between them, his voice firm. Enough, Mr. Clark. Step back now. Henry trembled, pointing a finger at Lauren, his voice faltering with rage. You should be careful. People like you always go too far, and one day, You'll get what you deserve. A small crowd began to gather, curious passersby drawn in by the commotion. Lauren noticed the astonished and disgusted looks in the crowd, but kept her focus on Henry. "Is that a threat?" she asked, her voice sharp as a knife. Henry paused, realizing he had overstepped. "That's the truth," he said through gritted teeth, stepping back a step but his eyes still filled with malice. "People like you think you're untouchable. All right, let's see what happens when this town turns its back on you." The police officer stepped closer, his voice growing even more resolute. "Enough, Mr. Clark. This is your final warning. If there are any more aggressive actions, I will have to intervene." Henry laughed derisively, throwing his hands up as if everything was meaningless. "Oh, of course you're on her side now. This is the problem with our country. Favoring people like her while hardworking individuals like us are trampled." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a few shaking their heads in disbelief. A young woman in workout clothes pulled out her phone, pointing her camera at Henry, muttering, "Unbelievable. The more you do, the deeper you sink," Lauren said, her voice calm but strong enough to cut through Henry's anger. "Now everyone can clearly see what kind of person you are. You can no longer hide behind your restaurant, money, or slogans." Henry's hands clenched tightly at his sides, his face contorted with unspent anger. The police officer stepped closer, placing a hand on his waistband. "Mr. Clark, this is your final warning. Leave now or I will have to detain you." Henry glared at the police officer with contempt but eventually stepped back, his chest heaving from unresolved rage. He pointed at Lauren one last time, his voice booming, "This isn't over." He turned and stormed into the restaurant, the door slamming shut behind him, easing the tension in the crowd. A few people began to disperse, while a young woman remained standing, holding her phone, stepping closer to Lauren. "I have recorded everything," she said, her voice full of remorse. "If you need more video for the lawsuit, I will send it to you." "Thank you very much," Lauren replied, offering a faint smile. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart still pounding after the confrontation. The police officer turned to Lauren, his gaze softening. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," Lauren responded, her voice having regained its composure. "I've faced people like him before, but this time, I will ensure he is held accountable." The police officer nodded, his tone becoming professional. "If you need anything else for the complaint, feel free to contact me. And be careful. He seems unstable." Lauren nodded in gratitude, her eyes filled with determination. As she walked away, she could clearly feel the weight of recent events, but instead of fear, she felt only steadfastness. This was no longer her battle alone. It was a fight for justice, for all those who had ever been mistreated like her. The next day, Lauren sat in the office of Anna Reed, sunlight streaming through the tall window frames, illuminating the desk cluttered with law books and case documents. Anna, a sharp attorney specializing in discrimination cases, leaned over to watch the video on Lauren's phone. Henry's furious shouts echoed in the small room, each word unmistakable. "This is a clear case," Anna said, pausing the video. "Racism, verbal harassment, and even threats. He has left all the evidence we need to build the case." Lauren crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze resolute. "I don't just want compensation. I want to ensure he cannot treat anyone else like that again." Anna nodded, quickly jotting notes in her notebook. "We will start with the State Human Rights Commission, compel them to open an official investigation, and place his business under immediate supervision. Once that's done, we will prepare a civil lawsuit. If he has any sense, he might accept a settlement, but I doubt someone like him will." "He won't," Lauren said firmly. "He is too arrogant. But I am ready to fight." Anna set her pen down, clasping her hands together. "We will also seek punitive damages. This is not just to compensate you, but to ensure he faces consequences and to send a message to people like him." "Good," Lauren replied. "He has been acting out of control for too long." Anna tilted her head, her eyes scrutinizing Lauren. This won't be easy. People like Henry Clark often play the victim when their behavior is exposed. Are you prepared for the attention this case will bring? Lauren looked straight into Anna's eyes, her voice unwavering. I have faced worse. This is no longer just my issue. It's standing up for everyone who has ever been treated as if they don't belong. I will not back down. Anna smiled gently, pushing a stack of documents across the desk. Then let's get started. Evelyn entered the room, her voice gentle but full of determination. I think you need to start considering what's best for this business, for us. You don't need to admit anything. Just make a neutral statement. Say something to appease everyone. You will not apologize. Henry shouted, his voice growing increasingly harsh. She came here to pick a fight, and now she's trying to destroy us. It's all her fault. Evelyn pursed her lips tightly, but she did not back down. Maybe you should take a look at yourself, Henry. You don't need to humiliate her like that. You could treat her like any other customer, but you didn't. And now we have to pay the price. You treated her exactly how she deserves. Henry roared, slamming his fist hard onto the table. This is my restaurant, and no one can teach you how to run it. Evelyn shook her head slowly, her voice lowering but filled with exhaustion. You are too arrogant to see what's happening. You are digging your own grave, Henry. Henry turned back towards the window, staring intently at the increasingly large group of protesters outside. Signs reading "Racism has no place here" and "Justice for Lauren" were held high, chants echoing through the thick glass, growing louder each moment. Just let them protest, Henry muttered disdainfully. They will get bored and leave. Always the same. But deep inside, Evelyn knew that wasn't true. She could see the truth clearly, despite Henry's stubborn denial. That evening, Lauren sat on the sofa, her laptop open on her lap, messages flooding her inbox. Her video had gone beyond her personal social media, shared by local news channels, activists, and even national platforms. The comments, though overwhelming, were a source of motivation for her. Thank you for standing up, one person wrote. We need more people like you to fight against this hatred. Stay strong, another person messaged. You are making a difference. Lauren scrolled through the messages, each line embedding itself into her determination. This was no longer just her fight. It was a battle for all those who had been forced into silence, humiliated, or told they didn't belong. She closed her laptop, leaning back, her mind filled with plans for the road ahead. Henry Clark thought he could intimidate her, make her stay silent and leave unscathed. But he was about to learn what it means to face the consequences of his actions. Protests outside Clark's grill house were growing stronger each day. From a small group of a few people, the crowd now spilled onto the sidewalks, chants echoing from several blocks away. Signs reading "Racism ends here" and "Justice for Lauren" soared high above the heads of local residents, activists, and even curious onlookers. Henry stood in his office, his jaw clenched as he looked out the window towards the crowd. The once spotless reputation of the restaurant was now crumbling. The lunchtime patronage had dwindled to just a few loyal customers, but even they glanced around nervously, afraid to be associated with him. Henry, you can't keep ignoring this. Evelyn's voice rang out, breaking the tense silence. Her tone mixed urgency and exhaustion, her hands clasped in front of her chest. This is not just an image issue, it's a disaster. We are losing money every day. Henry did not look away from the window, his fingers tapping nervously on the glass frame, muttering, I will not bow down to them. You are not yielding, but you're also not doing anything. Evelyn nearly shouted, her voice soaring. The phone keeps ringing with complaints. The staff are panicking, and half of our suppliers are threatening to terminate cooperation. Finally, Henry turned back to look at Evelyn, his face as hard as stone. What do you want me to do, Evelyn? Kneel down and apologize to her and admit that I was wrong, when I haven't done anything wrong. Evelyn let her hands drop, exhaling in frustration. I want you to salvage what remains of this business before there's nothing left to save. Henry sneered contemptuously, pointing towards the window. They will get bored. The media will find another story, and everything will blow over. Evelyn pointed emphatically towards the window, her eyes blazing. Look, does it look like everything is blowing over? Henry did not respond. He turned back to look through the window, clenching his fists as his gaze fixed on the crowd. Lauren stood among the protesters, her phone in hand as she recorded the surrounding scene. The energy from the crowd seemed to transfer to her, the cheers and raised voices starkly contrasting the isolation she felt when facing Henry. Now she was no longer alone. From a distance, she recognized Sarah Bennett, a local journalist, weaving through the crowd with a microphone in hand. When Sarah saw Lauren, she waved her over. Lauren Harris? Her voice warm yet professional. Yes, that's me. Lauren nodded, her voice steady. Sarah signaled to her film crew, who quickly adjusted their equipment. Could you say a few words for us? Your story has garnered a lot of attention, and people want to hear directly from you. Lauren hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She stepped into the frame, the cheers from the crowd becoming the backdrop. Sarah raised the microphone, her eyes fixed intently on Lauren. Your video about the incident at Clark's Grill House has gone viral, sparking protests and strong reactions everywhere. Could you share why you decided to stand up? Lauren looked straight into the camera, her voice calm yet resolute. I stood up because what happened to me was not only wrong but also illegal. No one deserves to be treated differently because of their skin color, especially in a place that claims to welcome the public. This fight is not just for me, but to hold people like him accountable and to ensure that no one else has to go through the same thing. Sarah nodded, her eyes becoming contemplative. What do you hope to achieve through this fight? I want accountability, Lauren replied, her voice firm. Not just from Henry Clark, but from everyone who enables this behavior. And I want people to know that they have the right to stand up against discrimination, wherever it happens. Sarah smiled gently, lowering the microphone. Thank you, Lauren. Your courage is an inspiration to many. As the interview concluded, Lauren felt a light touch on her shoulder. She turned around to see a young girl holding a sign that read, Your fight is our fight too. The girl's face was flushed, her voice trembling as she spoke. Thank you for doing this, the girl said. My mother went through something similar a few years ago, but she didn't have the strength to stand up and fight. Seeing you stand strong like this, it means a lot to me. Lauren smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. Thank you, she said softly. That really means a lot. The girl nodded, stepping back into the crowd with her sign held high. Lauren turned back to look towards the restaurant, her eyes resolute as she spotted Henry standing. Behind the window, he was still watching, but this time she no longer felt the weight of his anger. She felt the strength of herself and of everyone standing with her. That evening, Henry sat alone in his office, the shouts of the protesters still echoing faintly through the walls. His hands trembled as he reopened his laptop, accessing the restaurant's social media page. Reviews and comments flooded in, filled with anger and contempt. You're finished, Clark. One comment read, This isn't the 1960s. We won't tolerate this anymore. Another comment said, Apologize and resign. That's the only way to save yourself. Henry slammed his laptop shut, his chest heaving. He didn't know how much longer he could endure, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. With the protesters' shouts still echoing outside, Henry's world felt increasingly confined, as if walls were closing in on him. By the fifth day, the protests outside Clark's Grill House reached a climax. The crowd spilled into the streets, chants drowning out even the traffic noise. Signs reading "Racism ends here" and "Justice for Lauren" were held high above the increasingly fervent crowd. News crews lined the sidewalks, capturing every moment of the confrontation between Henry Clark and the community. Inside the restaurant, Henry's patience finally ran out. He couldn't stand the silence in the empty dining room, the angry calls from former customers, or the relentless shouts piercing through the walls. The protesters had taken everything from him: his business, his reputation, his control. And now they stood outside, mocking him. Enough! Henry growled, forcefully slamming his hand down on the reception desk. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the front door, Evelyn hurriedly following behind. "Henry, don't do this," she called after him, her voice tinged with panic. "This won't help anything." He ignored her, forcefully pushing the door open until it slammed against the brick wall outside. The crowd turned around upon hearing the noise, their chants pausing as they saw him. Henry's red MAGA hat gleamed in the twilight, like a beacon of defiance and rage. "Do you all think this is fun?" Henry growled, advancing, his voice cracking as he pointed at the crowd. "Do you think you can stand here, waving those signs, and destroy me? You are nothing but a bunch of idle leeches." The crowd erupted, their chants resounding loudly. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" they chorused in unison. Henry's face flushed deeper. He stomped forcefully toward a young protester holding a sign that read, "Justice for Lauren." "Do you think you're a hero?" Henry snarled. "You know nothing about me, about my restaurant. You're just a follower of the crowd." The young man did not back down, his hand still firmly holding a phone that was recording Henry's outburst. "The whole world knows who you are," he replied, his voice calm but steady. "Shut up," Henry shouted loudly, his hand jerking forward as if to snatch the phone. The young man flinched slightly but did not move, his gaze still fixed on Henry's face. "Step back," another protester yelled, inserting herself between Henry and the young man. It was a middle-aged woman, her face full of determination. "You cannot intimidate us." "I am not threatening you," Henry bellowed, his voice trembling. "I am trying to save my business, to save my life. But you don't care. You just want to destroy everything I've built." "Destroy, huh?" the woman retorted sharply. "You are the one who humiliated a black woman in front of all the customers in your restaurant. You are the one who caused this." The crowd applauded in agreement, their shouts resounding once more. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Henry spun around, both hands raised as if to silence everyone. "You don't understand," he shouted loudly, his voice choking. "She came here to pick a fight. She wanted this to happen. She wants you to refuse service, insult, threaten, and call the police?" the young man asked, his eyes full of astonishment, still holding the recording phone. "Is that what you think?" Henry roared. "You don't know what it feels like to work hard all your life, to build everything from scratch, only to have it destroyed by outsiders." The crowd fell silent for a moment, Henry's words slicing through the air like a knife. A voice rose from the end of the crowd. "Outsiders? What do you mean?" someone shouted loudly. Henry realized his mistake too late. His mouth opened, but no words escaped. The crowd surged forward, their voices growing louder, angrier. "Racism!" one person shouted. "Apologize immediately!" another yelled. Henry took a step back, the defiance on his face gradually fading, replaced by desperation. "You don't understand." His voice broke, shattering. "I have no intention to apologize," Henry growled, his voice overpowering the shouts outside. "Apologize! Apologize!" The crowd chorused, their voices rising, stronger. Evelyn stepped out of the restaurant, grasping Henry's hand, her voice stern. "Henry, stop it!" She spoke softly but urgently. "You're making everything worse." Henry jerked his hand away, turning to look at Evelyn with eyes full of rage. "I will not apologize to them," he yelled. "I did nothing wrong." Nearby police officers approached, hands resting on their belts, one gesturing to calm the crowd. "Everyone, please remain peaceful," the officer said, his voice rising above the noise. The protesters stepped back slightly, their shouts continuing but less intense. Henry, his chest heaving, stared intently at the crowd one last time before quickly turning and stepping into the restaurant. Evelyn silently followed, her face pale with anger and disappointment. Inside, Henry slammed the door shut and leaned against it, his breathing uneven and rapid. "They can't win," he muttered, as if speaking to himself. "They can't destroy me." Evelyn crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze cold as she looked at him. "You have already destroyed yourself, Henry," she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. In the days leading up to the court trial, Anna's office resembled a battlefield. Files and documents were strewn across the large conference table, each piece of evidence carefully reviewed and categorized. Lauren sat at the end of the table, her laptop open, watching the video countless times. Henry's shouts, his venomous words, and his sarcastic smiles were etched deeply into her memory. Anna paced the room, flipping through pages in her notebook as she outlined the strategy. "The videos are our strongest weapon," she said, glancing at Lauren. "They capture everything. The refusal of service, the verbal abuse, and his threats. The State Human Rights Commission will take this very seriously." Lauren nodded, her jaw clenched. "What about his financial situation? You mentioned requesting the court to provide his financial records." Anna smiled faintly. "We have, and the picture is not looking bright. The restaurant has been declining for years. This lawsuit could be the final nail in the coffin, especially with the media and protesters outside." "Good," Lauren responded firmly. "He needs to fully face the consequences of his actions." Anna paused, leaning on the table. "We have also invited some former employees to testify. Several of them have shared stories about his discriminatory behavior, refusing to hire minorities, using racist language in the kitchen, and creating a hostile work environment. Their testimonies will show that this is not just an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior." Lauren narrowed her eyes. "Do you think he might want to settle before going to court?" Anna tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Possibly, but given his personality, I doubt it. People like Henry live by their pride. They would rather destroy everything than admit they are wrong." "Then we will be prepared," Lauren said. On the other side of the city, Henry sat in his office, his eyes narrowing as he looked at his attorney. The young man, neatly dressed, clearly uncomfortable under Henry's stern gaze. "So, what are my options?" Henry asked, his voice icy cold. The attorney cleared his throat, looking down at his notes. "Mr. Clark, the evidence against you is very strong. The videos alone are sufficient for conviction, not to mention the witnesses who have testified. I strongly advise you to settle this matter before it goes to court." Henry slammed his hand down on the table, startling the lawyer. "Settle? Are you kidding me? Doing that would be like admitting I'm wrong." "Mr. Clark, with all due respect, you are in the wrong," the attorney carefully stated. "You refused service to a customer based on their skin color. That is illegal. If this goes to court, you will lose, and the compensation could bankrupt you." Henry leaned back in his chair, his face flushed with anger. "I don't care about the money," he growled. "This is about my reputation. If I settle, people will think I'm a coward." "Your reputation is already in ruins," the attorney stated candidly. "You have become a national exemplar of racism. A settlement could help salvage some of your image and minimize the damage." Henry's eyes sparked with defiance. "No, I will not back down. Let her come here. Let all of them come here. I am not admitting anything." The attorney sighed, gathering his notes. "Then I will prepare for trial. But you need to understand that your chances of winning are very low." "Just do your job," Henry retorted. At Anna's office, Lauren met with two former employees of Clark's Grill House, both young men around 20 years old. They sat across from her, nervously sipping their drinks as they recounted their experiences working under Henry. "He always treated us differently," one of them said, his voice low. "He never said it outright, but the feeling was very clear, as if we weren't good enough to work there. He didn't even bother to hide it from me," the other added. "He called me lazy countless times, and when I asked for a raise, he laughed in my face, telling me I should be grateful to be hired." Anna took notes as they spoke, occasionally nodding. "Your testimonies will be very important," she said. "We need you to present your experiences clearly and concisely. The goal is to demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory behavior." The first one hesitated. "Do you think he will take revenge on us for this? I mean, he has the money to." Anna shook her head decisively. You are protected under whistleblower laws. He cannot retaliate against you for speaking up. And after this lawsuit, I doubt he even has the financial capacity to do anything. Lauren smiled reassuringly. You are doing the right thing, she said. This is not just for me, but for all those who have been unfairly treated by him. The two young men exchanged glances, then nodded. Preparations continued, Lauren feeling a mix of fatigue and determination. Each day brought new evidence, a new perspective, a new wave of support from people who had learned about her story online. She read those messages late into the night, each word fueling her strength. Thank you for fighting for all of us. One message read. Don't give up. We always support you. Another message read. Sitting alone in her apartment, Lauren glanced at the stack of court documents on the coffee table. The battle had taken much from her, but giving up had never been an option. Mr. Clark said that you don't belong there. Anna paused, her sharp eyes looking at Lauren, her voice gentle yet heavy with meaning. How did you feel at that moment? Lauren took a deep breath, straightening her back, her voice clear yet unable to hide the pain. I felt humiliated, she replied, her eyes lighting up with determination. Not because of the things he said, but because it reminded me that even today, my skin color can still determine how others treat me. The courtroom fell silent. Every gaze in the room turned towards Lauren, eyes filled with empathy, tension, and even outrage. Anna slowly approached, her voice steady and reassuring. Did you ever think you would face such treatment when entering a restaurant that day? No, Lauren replied, her gaze never leaving Anna. I just wanted a meal. But instead, I was looked down upon because of my skin color. Anna nodded, stepping back a few steps, her eyes turning towards the jury. No further questions, Your Honor. Lauren left the witness stand, walking slowly but confidently. As she sat down, her eyes scanned Henry, who was sitting rigidly, his gaze full of rage yet tinged with confusion. At Anna's office, Lauren met with two former employees of Clark's Grill House, both young men around 20 years old. They sat across from her, nervously sipping their drinks as they recounted their experiences working under Henry. He always treated us differently, one of them said, his voice low. He never said it outright, but the feeling was very clear, as if we weren't good enough to work there. He didn't even bother to hide it from me, the other added. He called me lazy countless times, and when I asked for a raise, he laughed in my face, telling me I should be grateful to be hired. Anna took notes as they spoke, occasionally nodding. Your testimonies will be very important, she said. We need you to present your experiences clearly and concisely. The goal is to demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory behavior. The first one hesitated. Do you think he will take revenge on us for this? I mean, he has the money to. Anna shook her head decisively. You are protected under whistleblower laws. He cannot retaliate against you for speaking up. And after this lawsuit, I doubt he even has the financial capacity to do anything. Lauren smiled reassuringly. You are doing the right thing, she said. This is not just for me, but for all those who have been unfairly treated by him. The two young men exchanged glances, then nodded. Preparations continued, Lauren feeling a mix of fatigue and determination. Each day brought new evidence, a new perspective, a new wave of support from people who had learned about her story online. She read those messages late into the night, each word fueling her strength. Thank you for fighting for all of us. One message read. Don't give up. We always support you. Another message read. Sitting alone in her apartment, Lauren glanced at the stack of court documents on the coffee table. The battle had taken much from her, but giving up had never been an option. Mr. Clark said that you don't belong there. Anna paused, her sharp eyes looking at Lauren, her voice gentle yet heavy with meaning. How did you feel at that moment? Lauren took a deep breath, straightening her back, her voice clear yet unable to hide the pain. I felt humiliated, she replied, her eyes lighting up with determination. Not because of the things he said, but because it reminded me that even today, My skin color can still determine how others treat me. The courtroom fell silent. Every gaze in the room turned towards Lauren, eyes filled with empathy, tension, and even outrage. Anna slowly approached, her voice steady and reassuring. Did you ever think you would face such treatment when entering a restaurant that day? No, Lauren replied, her gaze never leaving Anna. I just wanted a meal. But instead, I was looked down upon because of my skin color. Anna nodded, stepping back a few steps, her eyes turning towards the jury. No further questions, Your Honor. Lauren left the witness stand, walking slowly but confidently. As she sat down, her eyes scanned Henry, who was sitting rigidly, his gaze full of rage yet tinged with confusion. At Anna's office, Lauren met with two former employees of Clark's Grill House, both young men around 20 years old. They sat across from her, nervously sipping their drinks as they recounted their experiences working under Henry. He always treated us differently, one of them said, his voice low. He never said it outright, but the feeling was very clear, as if we weren't good enough to work there. He didn't even bother to hide it from me, the other added. He called me lazy countless times, and when I asked for a raise, he laughed in my face, telling me I should be grateful to be hired. Anna took notes as they spoke, occasionally nodding. Your testimonies will be very important, she said. We need you to present your experiences clearly and concisely. The goal is to demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory behavior. The first one hesitated. Do you think he will take revenge on us for this? I mean, he has the money to. Anna shook her head decisively. You are protected under whistleblower laws. He cannot retaliate against you for speaking up. And after this lawsuit, I doubt he even has the financial capacity to do anything. Lauren smiled reassuringly. You are doing the right thing, she said. This is not just for me, but for all those who have been unfairly treated by him. The two young men exchanged glances, then nodded. Preparations continued, Lauren feeling a mix of fatigue and determination. Each day brought new evidence, a new perspective, a new wave of support from people who had learned about her story online. She read those messages late into the night, each word fueling her strength. Thank you for fighting for all of us. One message read, Don't give up. We always support you. Another message read. Sitting alone in her apartment, Lauren glanced at the stack of court documents on the coffee table. The battle had taken much from her, but giving up had never been an option. Mr. Clark said that you don't belong there. Anna paused, her sharp eyes looking at Lauren, her voice gentle yet heavy with meaning. How did you feel at that moment? Lauren took a deep breath, straightening her back, her voice clear yet unable to hide the pain. I felt humiliated, she replied, her eyes lighting up with determination. Not because of the things he said, but because it reminded me that even today, my skin color can still determine how others treat me. The courtroom fell silent. Every gaze in the room turned towards Lauren, eyes filled with empathy, tension, and even outrage. Anna slowly approached, her voice steady and reassuring. Did you ever think you would face such treatment when entering a restaurant that day? No, Lauren replied, her gaze never leaving Anna. I just wanted a meal. But instead, I was looked down upon because of my skin color. Anna nodded, stepping back a few steps, her eyes turning towards the jury. No further questions, Your Honor. Lauren left the witness stand, walking slowly but confidently. As she sat down, her eyes scanned Henry, who was sitting rigidly, his gaze full of rage yet tinged with confusion. But isn't it true, the attorney emphasized, that your story garnered more attention by being dramatized? Sarah raised an eyebrow, keeping her tone calm. I do not need to dramatize this story. What Mr. Clark did speaks for itself. The attorney paused, his eyes flashing with disappointment at Sarah's steadfastness. No further questions, he stated, returning to his seat. The trial continued with other testimonies, each piece of evidence gradually constructing an undeniable picture of Henry's behavior. As the trial neared its end, the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy and tense. Henry, once unshakably confident, now clearly appeared exhausted and anxious. Across the room, Lauren sat upright, her eyes determined, her heart pounding. This was no longer just her fight. It was an opportunity to effect change, to prioritize justice and accountability. Anna placed a gentle hand on Lauren's shoulder, her eyes conveying pride. "We've done everything we could," she whispered. Lauren nodded, feeling the tension within her ease slightly. But she knew that the final verdict would truly determine everything. When Mr. Clark confronted the protesters, "What happened?" Anna asked, her voice sharper, slicing through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Sarah Bennett tensed slightly, her eyes dropping. "He stepped out of the restaurant, shouting loudly, clearly agitated," she said. "Mr. Clark accused the protesters of deliberately sabotaging his business and yelled things like, 'You people don't belong here.' Those words were highly provocative and escalated the situation." Anna turned to the jury, her voice clear, emphasizing each word. "Did Mr. Clark attempt to de-escalate the situation or reduce the tension?" Sarah shook her head, her voice firm. "No, quite the opposite. His actions only heightened the tension. It's clear he had no interest in dialogue, only in asserting his authority." Henry's attorney stood abruptly, his voice harsh. "Objection, Your Honor. That is speculative." "Sustained," the judge replied, his voice deep and authoritative. "Ms. Bennett, please present only what you observed." Anna nodded, continuing. "Ms. Bennett, did you record Mr. Clark's actions during the protest?" "Yes, I did," Sarah responded, her voice steady. "Your Honor," Anna said, holding up a USB drive, "I would like to submit this video as evidence." The judge nodded. "Granted." The courtroom lights dimmed as the video played on the large screen. Henry's voice echoed from the speakers, filled with anger. His face contorted as he shouted at the protesters. The phrase, "You people don't belong here," rang out clearly, causing both the jury and the audience to gasp in surprise. Anna stopped the video, turning back to look at Sarah. "Is this what you witnessed that day?" "Yes," Sarah affirmed. "This is exactly what happened." "No further questions," Anna stated, returning to her seat. Henry's attorney stood, his face hard as he approached the witness stand. "Ms. Bennett, as a journalist, isn't it your job to tell stories in a way that captures attention?" Sarah pursed her lips, her voice calm yet resolute. "My duty is to report the truth." "But isn't it true," he pressed, "that the protest was highly tense even before my client stepped out? The crowd was loud, disorderly, and aggressive. Isn't that right?" "The crowd was very enthusiastic," Sarah responded, her eyes unwavering. "But they remained peaceful until Mr. Clark exacerbated the situation." The attorney's voice grew colder. "But isn't it true," the attorney emphasized, "that your story garnered more attention by being dramatized?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, keeping her tone calm. "I do not need to dramatize this story. What Mr. Clark did speaks for itself." The attorney paused, his eyes flashing with disappointment at Sarah's steadfastness. "No further questions," he stated, returning to his seat. The trial continued with other testimonies, each piece of evidence gradually constructing an undeniable picture of Henry's behavior. As the trial neared its end, the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy and tense. Henry, once unshakably confident, now clearly appeared exhausted and anxious. Across the room, Lauren sat upright, her eyes determined, her heart pounding. This was no longer just her fight. It was an opportunity to effect change, to prioritize justice and accountability. Anna placed a gentle hand on Lauren's shoulder, her eyes conveying pride. "We've done everything we could," she whispered. Lauren nodded, feeling the tension within her ease slightly. But she knew that the final verdict would truly determine everything. When Mr. Clark confronted the protesters, "What happened?" Anna asked, her voice sharper, slicing through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Sarah Bennett tensed slightly, her eyes dropping. "He stepped out of the restaurant, shouting loudly, clearly agitated," she said. "Mr. Clark accused the protesters of deliberately sabotaging his business and yelled things like, 'You people don't belong here.' Those words were highly provocative and escalated the situation. Anna turned to the jury, her voice clear, emphasizing each word. Did Mr. Clark attempt to de-escalate the situation or reduce the tension? Sarah shook her head, her voice firm. No, quite the opposite. His actions only heightened the tension. It's clear he had no interest in dialogue, only in asserting his authority. Henry's attorney stood abruptly, his voice harsh. Objection, Your Honor. That is speculative. Sustained, the judge replied, his voice deep and authoritative. Ms. Bennett, please present only what you observed. Anna nodded, continuing. Ms. Bennett, did you record Mr. Clark's actions during the protest? Yes, I did, Sarah responded, her voice steady. Your Honor, Anna said, holding up a USB drive. I would like to submit this video as evidence. The judge nodded. Granted. The courtroom lights dimmed as the video played on the large screen. Henry's voice echoed from the speakers, filled with anger. His face contorted as he shouted at the protesters. The phrase, "You people don't belong here," rang out clearly, causing both the jury and the audience to gasp in surprise. Anna stopped the video, turning back to look at Sarah. Is this what you witnessed that day? Yes, Sarah affirmed. This is exactly what happened. No further questions, Anna stated, returning to her seat. Henry's attorney stood, his face hard as he approached the witness stand. Ms. Bennett, as a journalist, isn't it your job to tell stories in a way that captures attention? Sarah pursed her lips, her voice calm yet resolute. My duty is to report the truth. But isn't it true, he pressed, that the protest was highly tense even before my client stepped out? The crowd was loud, disorderly, and aggressive. Isn't that right? The crowd was very enthusiastic, Sarah responded, her eyes unwavering. But they remained peaceful until Mr. Clark exacerbated the situation. The attorney's voice grew colder. Is there a possibility that the video you provided has been edited to make my client look as bad as possible? Sarah did not blink. The video is unedited. What you see is exactly what happened. The attorney's mouth twitched slightly, but he nodded curtly. No further questions. Sarah left the witness stand, her composure intact as she returned to her seat. Anna stood once more, her voice unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we would like to call our final witness, Jordan Carters. Jordan, a former employee who had previously testified, stepped up to the stand looking both anxious and resolute. After taking the oath, he clenched his hands tightly, his eyes fixed on Anna. Jordan, Anna began, her voice gentle yet confident. In your previous testimony, you spoke about your experience working under Mr. Clark. Can you elaborate on how he treated minority employees? Jordan took a deep breath. He treated us like we didn't belong there, Jordan said, his voice low but weighted with emotion. He called us lazy, assigned us the hardest jobs, and criticized us for things he ignored in other employees. Anna nodded, her gaze encouraging. Did Mr. Clark ever use racially discriminatory language? Jordan lowered his head, his voice softening. Yes, he used slurs when he thought no one was listening. And he joked once that certain people shouldn't work in places like this. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom, the jury exchanging tense glances. Anna took a step closer to the stand. Jordan, why have you chosen to testify today? Jordan lifted his head, his voice louder, clearer. Because I'm tired of staying silent. People like him think they can keep getting away with this, but they can't. It's wrong, and it has to stop. Anna nodded, her tone dropping to a solemn note. Thank you, Jordan. No further questions. On the final day of the trial, the tension in the courtroom was almost suffocating. Every seat was filled, reporters scribbling furiously in the back row. Lauren sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands resting lightly on her lap, striving for composure even as her steady breathing betrayed her nervousness. Across the room, Henry slumped in his chair, his shoulders drooping, his face gaunt, markedly diminished from the confident man he had been at the start of the trial. His confidence had been eroded by the relentless presentation of irrefutable evidence. The judge peered over his glasses, addressing the courtroom. "Counsel, are we ready to present closing arguments?" Anna stood, smoothing her jacket before approaching the jury. Her voice was even, yet every word carried undeniable power. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the testimonies. You have seen the evidence. This case is not merely about a single instance of discrimination. It is about accountability, fairness, and the courage to stand against injustice." She gestured subtly toward Lauren, her eyes filled with resolve. "My client did not ask for this fight," Anna continued, her voice echoing in the charged silence of the courtroom. "She entered Clark's grill house that day seeking nothing more than a meal, not a confrontation. She was polite, calm, and reasonable. But instead, she was met with hostility, humiliation, and an effort to strip her of her dignity, all because of the color of her skin." Anna paced deliberately, her footsteps punctuating her words. "Mr. Clark has tried to frame his actions as a misunderstanding, but the evidence tells a different story. The video, the testimonies of former employees, and even his own words paint a clear picture. A man who believed he could treat others differently because of their race. This is not only morally wrong, it is against the law." She turned to face the jury, her voice softening but retaining its strength. Lauren Harris stood up not just for herself, but for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. "Your decision today has the power to send a message that such behavior will not be tolerated." Anna returned to her seat, her expression resolute as she sat beside Lauren. Henry's attorney rose, adjusting his suit jacket as he approached the jury. His face was tense, his tone defensive. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "we have heard many allegations in this trial, but let us not lose sight of the truth. My client is a small business owner who has dedicated his life to building his restaurant. That day, he made a decision that may have been misunderstood, but it was not driven by racism." He pointed toward Henry. "Mr. Clark has faced an onslaught of criticism from the media, protests, and threats to his livelihood over this incident. He is not a perfect man, but he is not a racist. This lawsuit has been blown out of proportion by individuals with their own agendas." The attorney paused, his voice lowering as if to evoke sympathy. "Consider the precedent this case sets. If we punish business owners for every misunderstood mistake, where does it end? Please, do not let a misunderstanding destroy a man's life." He returned to his seat, his shoulders sagging as he whispered something to Henry, who refused to meet his gaze. The judge addressed the jury, his voice solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the arguments and reviewed the evidence. It is now your duty to deliberate and reach a verdict. Court is adjourned until the jury has made its decision." The gavel struck, and the jury filed out of the courtroom. Lauren exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of anticipation press down on her. Anna placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, her expression gentle. "You did everything you could," Anna said quietly. "Now we wait." The waiting felt endless. Hours stretched on as Lauren paced the courthouse hallway, her heart pounding with every passing moment. Across the hall, Henry sat slumped, staring at the floor, while his attorney murmured into his ear. Finally, a court officer emerged, his face expressionless. "The jury has reached a verdict," he announced. Everyone returned to the courtroom in hushed anticipation. Lauren sat down, gripping the edge of the table tightly. The jury foreperson stood, holding a piece of paper, his voice steady yet firm. "In the matter of Harris versus Clark, we find the defendant, Henry Clark, guilty of unlawful discrimination and harassment." The words rang like a bell in the courtroom. Lauren felt a wave of relief and vindication wash over her, her eyes welling with tears as Anna nodded in affirmation. The judge continued. "The jury also determines that the defendant must compensate for damages and undergo mandatory anti-discrimination training at his place of business." A murmur spread through the courtroom as Henry slumped in his chair, his face pale, his hands trembling. Evelyn, who had sat silently behind him throughout the trial, lowered her head, her expression unreadable. The gavel struck once more, signaling the trial's end. "Court is adjourned," the judge declared. Lauren stood up, her legs slightly trembling, but her spirit soaring. Supporters in the courtroom clapped gently, and Anna leaned in and whispered, "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," Lauren replied. Henry left the courtroom without saying a word, his attorney quietly following behind. Lauren watched him leave, his image a sharp reminder of the battle she had endured. Outside, the crowd of supporters cheered loudly. The sun shone brightly, and for the first time in many weeks, Lauren felt the pressure on her shoulders lift. She raised her hand in a gentle wave, the cheers washing over her soul like a soothing wave. This was not just her victory. It was a triumph for everyone who believed in justice. She stepped onto the courthouse steps, the air around her buzzing with energy. Signs reading "Justice for Lauren" and "Racism has no place here" fluttered in the wind. Anna approached, leaning in to whisper, "This is your moment, Lauren. Speak from your heart." Lauren nodded, stepping forward, raising her hand to signal the crowd to quiet down. "Today's verdict is not only my victory," she began, her voice steady and clear. "This is a victory for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. It proves that standing up against injustice, no matter how daunting, can bring about real change." The crowd erupted into applause and cheers. Lauren looked across familiar faces in the crowd, those who had stood by her throughout the trial. "This fight has never been just about me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "This is about all who have been silenced, made to feel inferior, or told they have no place here. Discrimination has no place in our community, our businesses, or our country." The crowd once again roared with approval, slogans blending with the wind like a song of hope and determination. "We have sent a message that such behavior will not be tolerated." Lauren's voice resounded, clear and emotional. Tears welled up in her eyes as the crowd cheered in acclaim. She stepped back, letting Anna guide her down the steps. Supporters surged forward, reaching out to shake her hand, embrace her tightly, and express their gratitude. A young girl approached, clutching a sign that read, "Your fight is our fight too." She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice trembling. "Thank you," she said softly. "What you did today gives hope to people like me. My family has been through so much, and seeing you win truly means everything." Lauren's heart swelled with emotion. She placed a hand on the girl's shoulder and offered a warm smile. "Thank you for being here," she replied. "This fight is not over, but we have taken a significant step forward." The girl nodded, tears glistening in her eyes as she stepped back into the crowd. Lauren turned to Anna, receiving an approving nod from her. Elsewhere in the city, the atmosphere inside Clark's Grill House had grown bleak and heavy. The once bustling restaurant was now dark and empty, chairs neatly stacked on tables, and the gleaming bar untouched. Henry Clark stood behind the counter, his hands clenched tightly on the tabletop, his gaze fixed sorrowfully on the empty space. The verdict was a public humiliation, but the financial consequences were far worse. Customers abandoned the restaurant, suppliers cut contracts, and the bank froze his accounts. The business he had spent decades building was collapsing before his eyes. Evelyn entered silently, clutching a file and a stack of bills. She placed them on the bar, sighing. "The bank called back," she said wearily. "They have officially repossessed the loan. And the suppliers, they've left too. We have no other options." Henry did not respond, his gaze still fixed on the bar, his jaw clenched tightly, hands white from gripping the countertop. "You have to face the truth, Henry," Evelyn continued, her voice softening. "This is over. The restaurant cannot recover from here." Henry's voice was a low growl filled with resentment. "Unfair," he muttered. "Lauren destroyed everything. She made everyone turn their backs on me." Evelyn's patience had finally run out. "No, Henry, you did this to yourself," she said, her voice rising, filled with anger. "You were the one who refused service to her. You were the one who humiliated her. And instead of apologizing, You wallow in arrogance and hatred. She did not force you to say those things. She did not force you to shout at the protesters. It was your choice, and now you are paying the price. Henry glared at Evelyn, but he could not respond. He turned away, his shoulders heavy under the weight of her words. Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice softening. You are losing everything, Henry. The restaurant, the community's respect, and perhaps even me. But this is not just about what you have lost. It is about what you could have saved if only you had swallowed your pride. Henry did not reply. He stood there, staring out the darkened street outside, his reflection on the glass door like a ghost of the man he used to be. In her apartment, Lauren sat on the sofa, the silence starkly contrasting with the chaos in the courtroom. She set down her bag and leaned back, sighing. For the first time in many weeks, the tension in her chest began to dissipate. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, its screen lighting up with a flood of messages. Lauren picked it up and scrolled through, her heart warming as she read each message of encouragement and congratulations. You are an inspiration, Lauren. Thank you for standing up for what is right. This is a victory for all of us. One message made her pause. You are not just fighting for yourself. You have fought for all of us. Thank you. Lauren set her phone down, tears welling in her eyes. She had started this fight to seek justice for herself, but along the way, it had become so much more. It was about showing everyone that they do not have to accept injustice, that they have a voice and the power to make it heard. The next morning, Lauren met Anna at a small cafe near the courthouse. The two women sat by the window, steaming cups of coffee between them as they reviewed the case. What now? Lauren asked, stirring her coffee gently, her voice contemplative. Anna leaned back in her chair. Clark's Grill House will be subject to mandatory anti-discrimination oversight. But that doesn't matter much anymore. I doubt the restaurant can survive another month. Their reputation is gone, and the compensation he owes will be the final blow. Lauren nodded, her expression thoughtful. But this is not just about him, she said softly. It's about the significance this lawsuit holds. If it motivates others to stand up, then it's all worthwhile. Anna smiled. You did that. You showed everyone that standing up against injustice can bring about real change. You made a difference, Lauren. Lauren responded with a smile, raising her coffee cup gracefully. For change, she said. Anna clinked her cup with hers. And for holding everyone accountable. In the following weeks, the impact of the lawsuit spread widely. Local businesses began reevaluating their policies to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination laws. Community organizations leveraged the lawsuit as a call to action, promoting broader protections against racial bias. Lauren became the centerpiece of a movement, invited to speak at events and seminars where her story inspired others to stand up. She shared her journey with strength and humility, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to remain silent. One evening, after a particularly moving event, Lauren stood on the steps of the community center, watching the city lights shimmer. The fight had drained her, but it had also given her something invaluable. A purpose, a foundation to create change. Taking a deep breath, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Have you ever had to stand up against injustice, knowing the journey would be challenging? Share your story in the comments. Who knows, your voice might inspire someone searching for the courage to act. If this story resonated with you, don't hesitate to share it with friends and family to help spread the message of fairness and bravery. Every share is a step forward in building a respectful and loving community. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the purpose of promoting humanistic values in life and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any inaccuracies, please overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.